Welcome, powerful soul. You didn't land here by accident. You were drawn here. And not by the algorithm, but by alignment. Because something in your spirit knew it was time to receive this. This isn't just another message, it's confirmation. It's clarity. It's the kind of truth that doesn't just resonate, it rearranges. Let me speak to the royalty in you. You've survived battles no one saw, carried weight in silence, and made decisions that shifted entire atmospheres without saying a word. That's not weakness, that's spiritual authority. You've walked through seasons where your only reward was survival, and yet here you are, more grounded, more self-aware, more dangerous to the darkness than ever before. And if lately you've been feeling something shift in your energy, your circle, or even your tolerance level, that's not random. That's alignment catching up to your obedience. You've been moving different, thinking sharper, protecting your peace like never before. That's not you being cold. That's you being called. Tonight, we're unlocking something deeper. We're not here for fluff. We're here for fire, for revelation, for the kind of word that hits your core and reminds you the hell you are. So grab your water, your notes, or just get still, because what's coming next? It's not just a message. It's a mirror. Let's go. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. There comes a time when the interruptions aren't just about people. They're about dismantling the pathways they use to siphon your balance. What happened wasn't merely a cut in communication. It was a reclamation of inner territory. Some presences don't storm in. They erode gently. Through overstayed conversations that dull your intuition. Through habitual comments that quietly unthread your confidence. Through recurring glances or remarks that leave behind a weight without a name. And the disarming part? It rarely wore the face of overt harm. Sometimes it looked like catching up, sarcasm wrapped in a smile, or you're too sensitive. But accumulation exposed what was always camouflaged. Tiny withdrawals from your spirit, normalized by repetition. Then something shifted. Maybe it was skipping a reply. Maybe it was thinking differently and letting that thought live. Maybe it was walking away without a speech. That single movement disrupted a cadence. And these cadences are the favorite hiding places of spiritual clutter, not the dramatic events, but the mundane loops that teach endurance over discernment. This wasn't rejection, it was revocation. An unseen hold was severed. Their pull on your empathy, your people-pleasing reflexes, or the fear of seeming cold gone. And what followed wasn't applause, but a silence that felt like wind clearing a fog. Not empty, clear. No longer rearranging your thoughts to accommodate their presence. No longer haunted by unsaid defenses. That peace you're feeling? It's not absence. It's the sound of restored agency. You didn't burn a bridge. You removed the toll booth. They quietly set up inside your emotional routes. And now, they no longer have the ticket to travel where they once lingered without cost. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Without realizing it, a silent agreement was undone, one that was never laid out, but lived in your compliance. Somewhere in the past, survival scripted you into roles you didn't audition for. Not in ink, but in decisions. Staying agreeable when discomfort screamed otherwise. Deferring to maintain calm. Bearing weight you were never meant to hold. Every time you absorbed the blow to keep the peace. Every time you adjusted yourself so others wouldn't feel threatened. That was your silent consent. But recently, a quiet refusal rewrote everything. It wasn't in raised voices. It was in the stillness of a different choice. That choice became a pivot. You stopped conforming to the outline they traced around you. The version of you they leaned on, the agreeable, the predictable, didn't show up. The usual exchange was interrupted. What broke wasn't just habit. It was an energetic framework that once ensured their comfort at the expense of your clarity. Now, they may respond with confusion, irritation, or detachment, not because you hurt them, but because their grip depended on your silence. And that grip is gone. This shift may have felt subtle on the outside, but it realigned everything internally. Guilt might have tried to visit. Tension might have knocked. But what truly arrived was release. You turned away from a cycle that thrived on your accommodation, and in doing so, you reclaimed something sacred, your right to be whole without explanation. What once ensnared you can no longer follow, not because you escaped, but because you dismantled the magnet. What was lost wasn't peace. It was a weight that masqueraded as connection, and what replaces it now is a calm so unfamiliar. It almost feels radical. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Recognizing what no longer belongs in your hands is not weakness. It's wisdom arriving late, but exactly on time. What recently occurred wasn't just a boundary drawn. It was a refusal to be the silent vault for burdens that never originated from your choices. There was a time when taking on emotional overflow from others felt noble, necessary even. Becoming the consistent redeemer, the peacekeeper, the quiet absorber of everyone else's storms seemed like love. But that pattern was a disguise. Behind it lived the false script that said someone else's imbalance was your responsibility to fix. Gradually, this script trained reactions into muscle memory. Apologizing when wronged, adjusting when overlooked, offering support to those who only circled back to drain you again. But without permission, you broke the repetition. There was no big announcement, just a quiet refusal to engage. The decision to no longer decode passive jabs, to stop cushioning every collapse that wasn't your own. And when that shift happened, space returned. Breathing room replaced the ache. The weight you thought was normal evaporated, not from neglect, but from clarity. Here's what is often hidden. When the tether is empathy, control can wear the face of helplessness. When you stepped away, panic followed, not because you harmed anyone, but because the lever of guilt stopped working. The silence that followed wasn't your punishment. It was the noise dying out. The role of caretaker, inherited without your consent, dissolved when you decided that redemption isn't your endless task. And while they may scramble to reclaim their grip, the truth is they no longer have the map to navigate you. The act of stepping back wasn't cruelty. It was liberation. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped standing in rooms that collapsed as soon as you entered. And that absence, that is the start of honoring yourself, not through resistance, but release. Some changes begin not with confrontation, but with a single unspoken question that rearranges the entire foundation. A shift arrived the moment you began to suspect that the image reflected back to you wasn't honest, just convenient, for someone else. Over time, impressions were handed to you with quiet insistence, not through direct accusation, but through repetition. Too reactive, too emotional, too complex, too inconsistent. With enough echoes, you began to shape yourself around those verdicts, quietly chipping away the pieces that didn't fit their blueprint. But somewhere recently, something misaligned in the familiar script. Maybe a phrase landed differently. Maybe silence revealed an unsettling clarity. And in that moment, an internal curtain lifted. A simple doubt surfaced, not born of rebellion, but truth finally asserting itself. What if their version of me was never real? That thought didn't need an audience to matter. Its power wasn't in volume, but in revelation. Because the moment you questioned their depiction, the illusion began unraveling from within. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. This wasn't just a cognitive realization. It was a disruption to an entire framework. The weapons that once worked, guilt, silence, emotional fog, no longer stuck. Because once you look at yourself with undistorted sight, manipulation loses its anchor. There was no need to point fingers. No loud exit. The real power was never theirs. It was in your silent acceptance. And now that you've pulled that thread, the whole mask begins to fall away. This realignment isn't just healing, it's protection. Without that old agreement in place, familiar traps become unrecognizable. The code they use to access your compassion is obsolete. You're not just walking away from confusion. You're re-entering your own story as its rightful narrator. And for those who thrived on your hesitation, that kind of clarity is the most disruptive force they'll ever encounter. Letting go without demanding a final answer is not weakness. It's clarity dressed in courage. This wasn't about slamming doors or crafting a dramatic farewell. It was about recognizing that chasing final words from those who never offered truth in the first place only ties knots around your spirit. What many call closure is often just a trap in disguise, an open loop dressed up as healing, but really designed to keep you circling the same confusion. So when the decision came to walk away, and no farewell was exchanged, something sacred happened. The thread snapped, not from anger, but from understanding. Because waiting for explanations from those who thrive in shadows is like asking a mirage for water. Their silence wasn't an accident. Their vagueness wasn't ignorance. It was design. And you choosing to exit without trying to decode it all broke the very rhythm they depended on to stay connected. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. That moment didn't need applause. It needed alignment. Because the real trap was never the person. It was the expectation that they'd suddenly become someone else. By stepping away without looking back, you shattered a pattern that would have echoed into every future connection. You no longer sought validation through answers that were always withheld. The decision itself became the answer. And that freed you, not from memory, but from repetition. It wasn't detachment. It was protection. It wasn't coldness. It was wisdom. Because you didn't need their permission to leave. You needed your own. And now, what's behind no longer interrupts what's ahead. That quiet exit rewrote the ending. Not with punctuation, but with peace. A kind of peace that doesn't need to be earned through someone else's acknowledgement. Just accepted, fully, without conditions. There's an unseen strength in choosing silence over justification. Holding back what you know isn't concealment, it's discernment in motion. Sometimes the most radical form of power is saying nothing, especially when the urge to explain everything is loud. Recently, the shift wasn't loud either. It came in a simple decision, not to hand over your thoughts like open files to people who only read them to edit, twist, or delete. Because not everyone who asks is curious. Some seek information as leverage, not as understanding. And for too long, there may have been a sense of responsibility to overshare, to prove your intentions, to show the map of your mind, hoping it would foster empathy. But now the blueprint is locked. The gates are guarded, and not from fear, but from value. The wisdom earned through fire doesn't need an audience to be valid. It is architecture built from moments of stillness, choices made alone, and truths too fragile to be held by hands that only ever meant to reshape them. By holding it close, you created a sanctuary for what's sacred. This isn't secrecy. This is sovereignty. Now those who once knew the access points are disoriented. But their confusion is not your concern. It's the echo of not being able to trace your growth anymore. You didn't disappear. You refined your visibility. You didn't go mute. You elevated your language. What was once available for dissection is now reserved for alignment. And that shift didn't shrink you. It shielded you. This isn't hiding. It's preparation. What grows in silence often roots the deepest. The next chapter doesn't need announcement. It just needs presence. The decision to protect your progress, rather than perform your process, is no small thing. It's the reason your peace now moves uninterrupted, no longer filtered through those who were never meant to carry it. Choosing not to hand over your truth to those who twisted it was not surrender. It was strategy at its finest. There was a time when clearing your name seemed necessary, when every accusation begged for a rebuttal, when their distortion threatened to shape how others viewed you. But then came the pivot. You saw through the performance. You stopped attending the trial, where the verdict had already been written. Not because you lacked a defense, but because you recognized the audience wasn't listening. They were waiting to feast on your reaction. They didn't twist things out of ignorance. Their aim was control, not understanding. Painting themselves as victims was never about fact, but about casting shadows over your clarity. And your silence. That was not retreat, it was precision. Because what fuels their theater is your engagement. Without your participation, their drama loses momentum. Without your voice, their story collapses under its own weight. In refusing to chase their version of reality, you dismantled their structure. You walked out of a hall of mirrors and left the illusions to collapse. That choice didn't just guard your peace, it set cosmic laws in motion. What was once used against you is now folding in on itself. Not because you exposed it, but because lies unravel on their own when left unreinforced. Now the unraveling has begun. The facade that once swayed others is cracking, not through argument, but through the echo of your absence. And by the time their narrative collapses entirely, your presence will be so far removed it won't even require your attention. What once called for your defense now only echoes into a silence that speaks for itself. Some moments are so subtle, only the soul recognizes their magnitude. A familiar dynamic tried to re-enter, soft, almost harmless, but just charged enough to tempt you back into an expired version of yourself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a major confrontation. It came camouflaged in routine energy, an old role, a recognizable tone, an old reflex waiting to be triggered. But this time, nothing was fed. No reaction, no performance, no regression. Where you once might have defended, justified, flared, or folded, you simply remained. And that was the revolution. Not because the provocation disappeared, but because the version of you who would have answered it no longer resides here. That presence without participation sealed a doorway that had once remained cracked open. It's not that the test was new. It's that your response was. That stillness didn't indicate suppression. It revealed evolution. You no longer entertained the roles written by past wounds. You no longer rehearsed the part they expected you to play in their predictable script. And by not giving them the echo they sought, the entire structure of their manipulation lost its footing. That moment rerouted more than you know. What used to follow you, disguised as familiar comfort, unresolved identity, or emotional traps, lost its compass, because its directions were written for a version of you that no longer exists. They might have extended the bait, but your refusal to bite rewrote the entire outcome. No announcement, no confrontation, just a quiet, intentional step in a different direction. And now, that old pattern no longer has access. Not because you destroyed it, but because you outgrew its language. The shift wasn't about proving your growth. It was about embodying it so deeply that anything not aligned with it fades on contact. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. A silent shift occurred, no grand display, no emotional unraveling, just a deep, internal pivot where mediocrity quietly lost its place. There was no crowd, no confession, no ceremonial declaration, but something inside declared, without noise, this isn't enough anymore. And from that unspoken moment onward, the ground beneath everything began to rearrange itself. This wasn't rooted in bitterness or sudden discontent. It wasn't reactive. It was an anchored clarity, the kind that doesn't come from exhaustion but from evolution. A firm, invisible signal went out, subtle but seismic. The kind of signal that doesn't beg for attention but commands response. Not from people, but from life itself. Because real transformation doesn't need stage lights, it needs certainty. As that internal commitment took root, your surroundings began to reflect the decision. Connections that once felt tolerable began to feel hollow. Places that once seemed sufficient now felt misaligned. Efforts that once felt noble now felt misused. This wasn't about becoming dissatisfied. It was about remembering your value. Your inner compass adjusted, and now anything beneath that new calibration began falling out of orbit. This moment was not a meltdown. It was a calibration. A line drawn not in anger, but in self-respect. It didn't just echo in thought. It echoed across timelines. Now, anything rooted in scarcity, relationships, expectations, behaviors cannot remain. And if things appear to be shifting or falling away, it's not collapse, it's refinement. It's the old scaffolding detaching from a structure, finally growing beyond what it was built for. You didn't just walk away from a version of life. You issued a silent upgrade to your path. No chasing, no forcing, no pleading. Just alignment. Now, life must respond to your revised settings. The ordinary is no longer welcome because you decided you are not a placeholder for what could be. You are the gateway for what must be. That moment wasn't just clarity. It was a redirection of fate, initiated by a whisper only your soul needed to hear. Recognition arrived like a subtle click behind the eyes, a soft, undeniable realization that you weren't repeating coincidence, but replaying choreography. Same dynamics, just wrapped in different moments. What once looked random suddenly had shape. And this time, you didn't look away. You traced the rhythm back to its beginning, not to punish the past, but to release the present. You didn't fight it with blame or defend it with rationalizations. You just saw the loop. And instead of rehearsing the next act, you stepped out of it entirely. That choice wasn't loud, but it was revolutionary. Most never reach it. They stay stuck rehearsing different versions of the same role, wondering why the ending never changes. But you did something rare. You noticed. And noticing is power. That thread you pulled unraveled more than one lifetime. It wasn't just your behavior. It was inherited, passed down through glances, reactions, silences, and expectations so old they feel like instinct. But you paused the reflex. You cut the invisible string that tied you to outcomes that never served you. And in doing so, you not only rerouted your own direction, you cleared a pathway that those after you won't have to hack through again. That single refusal, that moment where you said, "This ends with me," became the firewall against repetition. The relationships that once asked you to shrink, the situations that asked you to prove, the energies that played on your fear, they don't know where to find you now, because the coordinates changed. You no longer live where your triggers did. This wasn't an act of rebellion. It was one of liberation. You didn't need a dramatic finale, just a conscious shift in behavior. That was the healing. That was the lockpick. That was the seed of legacy. And now, the echo of that decision moves forward through everything you touch, not just as a correction, but as a declaration. The repetition has ended. There was no escape route, no impulse to vanish into distraction. The easy exits were all open, yet none were taken. The ache was real, the discomfort loud, but you stayed, not out of helplessness, but out of determination to meet what most run from. While the world seduces with diversions, you chose the unlit room, where silence forces truth to surface. That stillness was not weakness. It was confrontation without theatrics. You did not numb it, dilute it, or translate it into noise. You allowed it to echo. Many spend lifetimes weaving rugs of avoidance, covering every splinter of sorrow with noise, excess, or chase. But you leaned in. You listened to the hollow instead of filling it. You let the ache expose what applause never could. And because of that, something profound began unraveling. Not destruction, but purification. In sitting through the storm, you burned away what no longer belonged in your inner architecture. Not because pain made you strong, but because it stripped the false layers hiding your strength. That choice rewired everything beneath the surface. While others may see calm, they don't see the new internal circuitry. One that now detects manipulation with clarity. One that no longer gets entangled in shiny illusions or familiar chaos. You didn't simply endure. You evolved. And in doing so, you constructed an inner compass built on direct experience. That's why your awareness feels sharper now. Why you're no longer soft toward deception. No longer confused by echoes of old wounds disguised as opportunity. Pain was never the enemy. Unprocessed pain was. And by letting it speak, by letting it stretch you without snapping you, you became fluent in your own emotional language. Now, anything dishonest can't remain near you long. That was the real alchemy. Not surviving the weight, but emerging with armor crafted from it. Self-control isn't always about force. It's sometimes about restraint wrapped in vision. What you turned away from wasn't easy. It shimmered. It called. It dressed up as convenience, as attention, as escape. It whispered promises in just the tone that used to pull you. But something in you paused. Not because the temptation was unfamiliar, but because the cost was too familiar. This was more than saying no to something obvious. This was recognizing when something slightly off was trying to slip through the cracks. It wasn't dangerous in appearance. It was subtle, fast, and coded in urgency. But you didn't move. You didn't follow the bait. You felt the distortion in the offer and chose to wait. That moment of quiet resistance, it rerouted an entire consequence that was never meant for you. Most mistake discipline as denial, but this was sacred timing in motion. You said, "Not yet," where most would say, "Why not?" That decision became a shield. It closed a passage that was leading to detours dressed as shortcuts. That thing you almost took on, whatever it was, would have cost too much later. And now, it's just another unopened door behind you. This wasn't hesitation. This was discernment. Choosing not to grasp at instant relief allowed space for what's truly aligned to arrive. You didn't just turn something down. You cleared the room for better. You didn't settle for temporary warmth. You built a place where lasting peace could actually stay. The discipline it took wasn't visible. There was no crowd, no applause. But there was recalibration. You walked past a mirrored version of your past patterns and didn't reach for it. That alone shifted your entire trajectory. Now, what approaches must match your truth, not your wounds? Because you're no longer operating from lack, but from foresight. And that patience will yield things the rushed path never could.